Chapter 1791. Priceless Collection. Carl used the system's shop interface to place an assortment of peerless grade items in the upper cabinet. Most of them were made for warriors, but there were items for healers and mages in there as well, enough to get everyone excited about the prospect of being able to obtain a rare item from the Darklight host. Oh, now that is a priceless collection. Aren't you worried that someone will try to rob the guild house? One of the immortals asked. Not particularly. I've already got the blood trim on my guild tabard from the last guild leader, who thought that it was a good idea, so I'm not too concerned about anyone else trying. The immortals looked shocked, so Carl activated Bestial Raiment to change into an outfit with a guild tabard. Well, look at that. A Peak Immortal Guild Challenge victory. That's hard to argue with. The system won't award you if you cheated. I suppose that should be expected from someone with whatever sort of physical development caused that name decoration. Just be careful that you don't attract the attention of any Supremes before you can upgrade these barriers. They're good, but nothing we can set will stand long against them. Carl nodded. I will get clan leader Nerissa to assist me with the upgrades. That should be all the power that they needed to upgrade the barriers to a point where they would sustain the guild house even against a serious attack. Once the pack leader came back, they would also have a supreme-ranked powerhouse on site, but that would be a while as he still needed healing. If we have anyone who is seriously interested in one of the items, we can move to the back room to discuss the transaction. Carl informed the room after a few seconds of everyone staring at the cases. One of the immortals nodded decisively and gestured to the back of the room. That left everyone wondering what item he had decided he couldn't live without. It didn't take a genius to figure out that the first day would be the hardest bargains, as there was so much demand in one spot. Normally, that would encourage a shop to drive the hardest bargain. However, once after a few weeks or years of trying to sell a highly valuable item, even the most stubborn immortals would normally give in and offer a reasonable level of flexibility on the pricing. Carl sat down in the meeting room with the immortal across from him. I'm guessing that it's one of the warrior items that you're interested in, given that you have a warrior-type class, he began. Astute observation. Those are going to be the biggest sellers anywhere you go. The one that I am most interested in is the bracelet with the bonus to the Earthquake skill. It's a specialty of mine, and I built a specialty attack pattern around it. Carl nodded. Earthquake wasn't one of the most rare or valuable skills, as the damage done by it was limited and many high-level battles didn't happen on the ground at all. If you were too far from the ground, Earthquake would just be pointless, unless you had some sort of specialty secondary skill that could turn it into a form of spatial quake. Kara perked up as she heard Carl's thoughts. That was a brilliant idea. She would have to make him get busy making new skills later. A spatial quake, where reality itself shook to damage targets in the area, would be similar in effect to the Chaos Vortex spell, but with a different elemental aspect. Illusions were the dominant form of lower-level spatial element skills, and they had Opal. With Illusionary Domain, Reality Warp, and Chaos Vortex, they had to be able to come up with something that would tear apart reality around the target. It was the sort of attack that nobody would be expecting, unless they knew that they were facing an illusion specialist. Carl let them plot and plan, knowing that Opal would have notes of their plans for later, when he had time to review what they had come up with. All right, I can do that. Now, what would you like to trade for it? The immortal thought about his answer for a few seconds, and then took out 2 small potted plants. To many, these would not be a trade that they are willing to take, but I suspect that you know the value. Carl inspected them with the system, but didn't get a chance to answer before Remy was shouting in his head that she needed those. They were rare alchemical ingredients that both her and Socrate had been trying to find since they arrived in the immortal world. If she could plant them in her space, they could have so many of them that they would never run out again. And there were few horrors as great in Remy's mind as running out of alchemy ingredients. Carl pretended to know more about the plants than he did as he examined them, but both appeared to be in excellent health. There were no signs of rot or drying leaves from poor conditions. All right, I will take that deal. These are definitely worth what you claim, according to our alchemist. You managed to message them that quickly? Carl laughed and tapped his head. Remy is my bonded beast. She knows what I know. And when you brought out alchemy reagents, she gave me the information. I understand now. Having bonded beasts with different knowledge sets has to be a huge advantage in most negotiations. Usually, it's a matter of who understands the true worth of things and whether they are willing to trade for what you have. Carl nodded. The Darklight host is willing to trade for most things. Unfortunately, the most abundant gear from the dungeons is not something that we need. However, that gear can be traded to the New Home Merchant Clan through Elder Malcolm, so it's not a complete loss. Chapter 1792. Baiting with Loot. Carl placed the plants in Remy's space, and the Naga immediately returned to plant them and begin the germination process so that she could clone them and grow more copies. That was the true difficulty of being an alchemist. You also had to be an excellent gardener, but the people who loved alchemy, where you spent ages indoors researching recipes in ancient tomes, and the ones who loved being in the garden with nature and flowers, rarely overlapped. Because of that, too many alchemists relied upon harvested resources instead of trying to grow their own. And too many of the gardeners who could have grown them never learned all the extremely specific requirements of the many rare alchemical ingredients. So, they were left at an impasse, and the quantity of resources available to the clans never really improved. Even a garden in the tiny world, which wasn't quite as good for growing rare plants as her own space, was vastly superior to what most clans could claim as their alchemy garden. Much to her delight, the plants took to the soil instantly, and she mentally nudged Leo to get some assistance with bonus nature magic to help the plants grow a bit more quickly. They would be cloned with cuttings, but they were still immature plants, and she needed them to be bigger before she could do anything with them, or she would risk the health of the host plant. The turtle sent a wave of plant growth energy into her space, and Remy laughed as she realized that she had not been nearly specific enough. The turtle was having an afternoon snack with his friends at school, and had only partially been paying attention to what Remy was doing before she made the request. So, he had simply given her whole space some assistance, and called it good enough for whatever she needed. It still did the job. Her new plants were settling roots into the soil, and given a few weeks, they would be ready to splice and start cloning. That was enough. While she worked, Carl handed over the gear piece, and heard the wave of groans and complaints go up from the main room of the store. You snooze, you lose. If they really wanted it, they should have been faster, the immortal joked. Carl laughed at the man's optimism, knowing that buying expensive gear was actually a risky proposition if anyone decided that they could try to take it from you. This one was strong enough that it shouldn't be an issue, but once he was in the wilderness, away from the city where some semblance of order was upheld, all bets would be off. That would be a few days, as he was also headed to New Home for the intake event. And by then, most would have forgotten a single piece of gear purchased on the first day the shop was open. After all, it was unlikely to be the only one that they sold. If Carl's guess was right, over the next half a day, they should sell everything of peerless grade in the display case. He just needed to give it some time before the ones that the guests here were contacting could arrive with payment. Just because they didn't have the money, or didn't want to spend so much on a peerless grade item, didn't mean that they didn't know an elder who wouldn't mind getting their hands on it. He just had to wait. Not for long, as Carl soon realized. The pack had called people that they knew who either came themselves or called other elders. Those elders, as well as the ones who had been in town waiting for the portal to New Home to be opened, called others, and that brought real customers to the shop in under an hour. Mr. Carl, I am Sect Leader Aktung of the Ironstaff Sect. I hear that you have a number of peerless grade items for warriors. A burly man greeted him at the door of the shop. Indeed. The ones on sale today are up there in the display case. They're a bit of a mismatch, but we weren't certain what anyone would want, so we made a bit of everything, Carl explained. Logical. Give me a moment, and I will ascertain for myself whether the item described to me is as promised by my acquaintance. This sect leader was overly formal, Carl decided, at least in his speech. He did seem easy enough to work with, as he simply went into the shop and stared at the shelf, examining the goods to be sure that whatever he was told was correct. Whatever he was told seemed to be correct, as he was quite pleased with the outcome, and Carl saw him take out a notepad to start doing math. Hopefully, not math about how much he could cut from his sect support funds so that he could afford to upgrade his gear, but you never really knew what a sect leader would do, or what he actually needed the gear for. Alright, the math works. I am familiar with a few other branches of the Darklight host. ones on other immortal worlds. Is this branch similar? Far too many strange and unique crafting skills concentrated in one spot with an utterly overpowered protector. Carl laughed. That's one way to put it. I'm not sure that we would have far too many craft as yet, as we just founded the branch, and it is still in development. But the basic template appears to be exactly what you are familiar with. What member did the guild choose as your protector of last resort? If it's not too forward of me to ask. Half the room turned to stare at him. It was far too forward to ask such a question. Asking about the peak strength of a guild or clan was essentially taboo. But Carl answered anyhow. We've got Matilda on speed dial, a legendary rank Chaos Dragon. Maybe not as good as those established branches with links to a demigod, but not bad for a new branch. And that silenced the mutters. Chapter 1793. You prefer chaos? You would have a Chaos Dragon that powerful in your guild? Are you not worried about the stability of your members? A chaos element influence that's strong is bound to cause issues. One of the immortals asked. We've even got a Chaos Badger who is aiming for supreme rank by the end of the decade. I doubt that having one dragon in another branch will cause us that many issues. Besides, as chaotic as her choices are, she is loyal, and that's what matters most. That was a rare attribute among the most powerful of beings. Even Supremes could barely work together, so getting a legend to work with you, or even stay in a guild, was incredibly rare unless they were the leader. Even the fabled divine guilds on other worlds rarely had any legends in them. Once they got that powerful, they would go off on their own to try to find their own route to divinity. One of the core aspects of divinity was that there was no duplication. Even if you had a divine being to guide you, only a handful in all of the realms could even begin to guide you on the way that would work for yourself. Not only did they have to understand divinity on an exceptional level, they had to understand you in a way that no amount of time could allow. Only specialized divine skills would allow that. So, your guild is aligned with the Chaos Gods? A peak immortal woman, who had been eyeing the mage ring with a large bonus to ice element damage, asked. The World Dragon, actually. That might have been obvious from my status as branch leader and avatar of the World Dragon, but it's not really a coincidence, as many would expect. The branches are all favored by the World Dragon. That actually makes a lot of sense, given how strange the Darklight host is. The adherents of the World Dragon tend to be a bit, Carl didn't actually know, but he shrugged anyhow and smiled, which made the immortals laugh. If he had given a proper response, they would have been shocked. The World Dragon's followers tended to be more than a little lacking in self-awareness, with zero sense of moderation or propriety, as their frame of reference tended to be the multiverse average that the World Dragon considered normal. But when you had created 100 million or more systems on both Mortal Realm and Immortal Realm worlds, how could you consider anything to be average? Well, I suppose when you're used to the World Dragon's viewpoint, chaos doesn't seem quite as disturbing as it does to the rest of us. Order and structure are important to most of us if we want to improve our skills and reach supremacy. We couldn't do it with that much chaos in our lives. It's not all bad. Breakthroughs are an element of chaos affinity. They break the stasis of order and propel your body into a new realm where you can try to establish a new form of ordered growth, different from what you had been working with before. The peak immortal stared at him as if he had just told her that the sun was black and time was actually nonlinear. That second part was true if you had access to the fourth dimension. However, that wasn't the sort of thing that it was wise to try to explain to others. It would just make their head hurt. More than one of the immortals was now seriously considering the worth of Carl's words. Indeed, breakthroughs were a violation of what would be considered order. So, perhaps it was actually necessary to have some level of chaos in their development. That could come after the most important parts, though. They needed gear. The peak immortal woman gestured to the ring up on the shelf. Branch leader Carl, I would like to speak to you about an item. Of course. Everyone, we will be back in a moment. This time the others began to cheer as they retreated to the back room to negotiate the price, but as soon as the door was closed, they took the opportunity to start making purchases of the less obscenely priced items from the Lycans. There was an intake event coming up, and for kids who were just finishing school, An epic grade token of appreciation that fit their desired style would be a great bribe to recruit new members. It was expensive, but getting the right item was normally a difficult task that involved many trips into dungeons. If you were unwilling or unable to do that, then you just took what you could get. Of course, that meant that they needed 2 items at the very least, so that their existing personal disciples didn't feel cheated. If that happened, the newbie would just be ostracized, and the general mood in the sect would turn sour unless the recruit was a true prodigy. In which case, sour wouldn't even begin to cover it. Getting the best stuff and having the talent to justify getting it would only make the other members feel more mediocre, and they would want someone to lash out at. Recruiting was always a touchy subject, even when everyone actually wanted to get new members. Just because they didn't object to more people didn't mean that they were willing to give up any of their own share to get them, or to have the newbies treated better than they were as newbies. That was the great trap. Many sects maintained traditions from when they were small and struggling, just because the old acolytes couldn't stand to see the new ones have it easier than they did. And that would factor into what they purchased for the new members today. In fact, it was leading many of them away from the epic grade items entirely, to the rare grade warrior gear that had been produced today by the Lycans. It might be simple stuff, mostly carved wooden rings, but it was all good bonuses. Enough that they could lure in a few members with it and not upset the ones that they already had. Especially because the appearance was so plain. Flashy swords and intimidating armor were immediately noticed, but few people would bother to check the stats on a simple wooden ring, even if they had the ability while it was equipped. Chapter 1794. Get the money fast. If you give us a picture of your clan seal, we can carve it into a ring. Simple emblems take under 30 minutes, and while there is an upcharge for the custom magical item, we can make ones with similar stats for you customized to your clan. One of the Lycan elders offered. Really? Of course. Whittling is a strong pastime among the Blackwoods pack. We have many skilled carvers, and they don't need any special abilities to carve or burn the emblem into a wooden ring before we upgrade it to a magical item. Oh, that's a wonderful idea. I have a metal signet ring. If you could use that to burn the emblem into 2 wooden amulet tokens, it would be perfect. We don't give our apprentices rings, we use amulets. The Lycans nodded. That wasn't a problem, they could just have the druids make a bunch of them and put the runes on the back. It would actually be easier than doing the runes on a ring. In that case, I will take 2 for certain. An hour's wait isn't a big deal, they won't start calling the recruits until tomorrow. The elders didn't bother to mention that they had dozens of people who could do the carving and runecrafting, so they would do multiple items at the same time. They would let the visitors think that they had to rush to get their orders in so that they would be done on time. By the time that the orders started coming out, they would already have the money in hand. And they gladly did. Carl and the mage who he was negotiating with both had to try not to laugh as they heard the rush of business from outside. Everyone was hurrying to place orders, but Carl's confidence had already told her that they had more than one person waiting to fill the custom orders, which were double the price of the pre-made items on the shelves for the same stats. Of course, they were selling so much off the shelves that 2 Lycans were on full-time stocking duty, refilling the apprentice-made sections of the cases with similar items as they were depleted. All their hard work from the day was vanishing, and the Lycans began to realize that they didn't have anywhere close to enough, despite having expected to need weeks to sell this much rare-grade gear. They had clearly underestimated the demand, given the event that was starting in the new home merchant clan. The timing was coincidental, but the elders were beginning to suspect that it hadn't mattered the reason that there were people in town. It would have still snowballed like this once they saw what was for sale in the shop. It was simply inevitable when you put out peerless grade items for open sale. "What did you have for me today?" Carl asked, and the woman looked toward the door. "It's a one-way soundproofing runic array. They can't hear anything that happens in here, but we can hear everything. It's perfect for a waiting room or negotiations, so nobody can sneak up on us. As an added bonus, if they think that we can't hear them because they can't hear us, they might even give away some lovely little tidbits of information." That is absolutely devious. I like it. All right, I've got a load of raw materials from the dungeons for you. You're a crafting guild, so surely you need more than just druid-created wooden sticks to make your gear. Carl nodded. Especially elemental stones. They make adding specific spell effects to high-end items so much easier. More complex spells aren't even possible without an appropriately attuned stone. Wonderful. Then you should be able to offer me a proper price for all of these. She placed a large bag full of elemental stones on the table. Compared to some of the super rare magical plants and other resources, the stones weren't all that valuable in the immortal world. They could even be made by those with the right elemental affinity and knowledge of fundamental rules, like Tion and Leo. But getting a whole bag full of them would still pay for nearly anything that someone needed. As Carl let the system calculate the value of the stones to the store, she added a single arcane element supreme rank stone to the pile. That caused the trade price to skyrocket to very close to the asking price for the item. I do believe that we have a deal. I can definitely use that arcane stone for the defenses of the guild house. They shook hands, and Carl passed over the item. You should get back out front. There are many more customers waiting. I will be on my way now. Clan leader Nerissa promised me a room somewhere in the clan for the night, and I don't want to have to wake her when I arrive. I suspect that she will be up for some time tonight. But you have a point. Arriving too late is a bit rude to the host. The mage laughed as she got up to leave, tucking her acquisition into her inventory. I'm sure that we will see each other again. This little shop of yours is going to become quite the hotspot if you keep coming out with items like that. Carl chuckled. It was an opening day strategic move, but perhaps we could make it an annual thing for the visitors who come for the recruitment event. I take it that the other large sects and clans do the same thing. She nodded. Tel Justo does it as a grand event for the whole city, 2 months from now, and the Almixii sect does theirs on New Year's Day every 5th year. Every 5 years? She nodded. They will take students young, or up to the age of 12. They don't recruit grown adults the way that most sects do. They prefer to train theirs from scratch. Or indoctrinate. The Almixii sect was known for their absolute devotion to the sect and the control that they had over both their members and the region around their city. Chapter 1795. The Moron arrives. The stream of customers only increased as the evening went on. The first of the visitors to leave had made it to the New Home clan, where they had informed their friends about the curious shops that they had found in the former Hyperion sect compound. They knew that it was taken over by the Darklight host, but the reports were conflicting on what they were selling. Some were raving about vast amounts of class-targeted rare-grade items, while others were talking about high fashion and epic-grade outfits. There was evidence for both, but most who had gone to one didn't realize that the other existed. They had gotten what they came for, and then departed without looking around the town too much. If they had known that there was so much more to see, they would have stayed a bit longer. But how were they supposed to know that the Hyperion sect's successor was so far superior to the sect they replaced that there was no comparison? It was still a small guild or clan. They didn't even use half the buildings in the town yet, and most of the people they saw were actually from the New Home merchant clan, who had set up an outpost there. It just didn't make sense to anyone that there would be a crafting power out in the open without any warning of their emergence. That happened sometimes, but it was startling every time that it did. In these circumstances, it added an extra layer of mystery to the New Home merchant clan. Not only had they won against an invasion force this year, but they had now spawned a crafting guild who had apparently been hidden within their ranks all this time. Carl had no time to find out anything about that. All that he had time for today was crafting. And he wasn't the only one. Most of the Lycans were there as well. Remy was working 2 cauldrons at a time with the help of her bodyguards, and even Dana had been drawn into the workshop to make runic items. That left a few of the elders to run the shop, along with the epic golem, upgraded gargoyles. Carl made 2 extras when he was making them for Ray, and they were coming in handy now that they were short-handed in the shop. If anyone wanted to start trouble, they wouldn't get far against a dark elven priestess with the constitution of a dungeon boss. Most wouldn't even try their luck with a dark elven priestess in the first place. Like the spider monsters of the goddess they worshipped, they had a long-standing reputation for doing horrible things to people who offended them. And they were proud of it. Interesting. These are constructs. Terrifyingly powerful constructs. But constructs. Have I perhaps wandered into the den of someone with my own unique tastes? Carl heard a voice from the front room ask, before he started getting panicked messages from the Lycans about the look on the elves' faces. They knew, in a theoretical way, that the golems shouldn't harm anyone in the shop. However, that hungry look did not bode well for the new arrival. Carl walked out to the front room and found Swag, affectionately known as the Moron, standing out front, openly ogling the dark elven priestesses. You know she would do bad, irreparable things to you, right? But that is a golem. You can't fuck it. Damn, not anatomically correct. She would kill you for trying. The Moron laughed as he gestured to all the stuff in the room. I don't suppose that you let your favorite clan member shop on credit? Ever since I got that blessing that gives me free food, I have been saving a ton on snacks, but I don't have enough for a new item yet. Carl laughed. Darklight host policy. In the gods, we trust. All others pay cash. The Moron sighed. Well, there's always dungeon runs. But the clan is short on missions today, so I thought that I would come over here and see if there was anything that could be done to make some credits. Carl frowned. Well, I don't have any clan missions for you, and I doubt that you want a counter-clerk's position. It wouldn't pay enough to keep you supplied. But I'm sure that we can find something for you to do in the morning. We just don't know what might be in the area to harvest, so we haven't been able to set any quests yet. Understandable. I usually go on missions when there is an intake event going on. It's a good time to collect resources. You never know what you might find after the fights in the wilderness. Fights. Not everyone gets along, as you're well aware. So, sometimes they fight to mutual destruction, or someone escapes an ambush only to die in the wilderness. So, if you're out there, you can sometimes stumble across good stuff before anyone else. But if you wait for after, then there will be hundreds of people in the area that might think you were the one who killed them. Carl nodded. That would be bad, especially if it was some of their clan members who were wondering why they never made it to the event. They would not be in the mood to accept any sorts of excuses or explanations that you might make. Exactly. It's a risky proposition, but most people tend to die with their gear equipped and their weapon in hand. That can be a pretty good haul. If it's got a clan emblem on it, I leave it behind. No point in starting trouble, and it's not like you can sell something like that. Even if you tried, you just put a huge target on your own back. The dark elven priestess smiled at him. I didn't think that you had it in you. You might be a scavenger, but you have a bit of bravery in you. Chapter 1796. Learning on the job. The Moron smiled at the cleric, but was smoothly led away by one of the Leakin elders. I actually have a mission for you. I can pay you 1 clan credit equivalent in store credit. What I need is for you to find me a corpse weave vine flower. It's fine if you get it in the morning, but there should be some west of here 20 or 30 kilometers. Swag smiled. Oh, that is excellent. I could use a clan credit. One might not be much in a gear store, but I see that you've got potions. Remy, who was busy making more of them, laughed. That was the only thing that he ever bought from the warehouse in the clan. He had started to change his outlook since he had advanced his class, but he seemed to still be sticking to his preference of only buying potions and no other forms of resources or gear from the warehouse. He was willing. It was just too set in his brain to change immediately. With a mission in mind, Swag gave one last longing look at the priestess and left the store. The faster he was gone, the faster he was back to get his clan credits. It had been a rough week for him. He had only managed to generate 1 cupcake all week, which was way below his average since the bonus started. He was a bit worried that it was a timed buff and beginning to wear off, so he was going to have to stack clan credits while he could before he was back to spending most of his money on food to avoid the cafeteria. The dark elven cleric giggled as the Lycans turned to her. Oh, don't be so uptight. I am perfectly capable of teasing a customer to encourage them to spend more money. I have all the relevant knowledge about sales tactics provided by Lady Ray after I was activated. Fear not, I am a fully capable and competent assistant or guard for the shop. Plus, with multiple copies of an identical Guardian active, we have no fear of distracting customers who prefer to deal with a specific staff member. The Lycans were torn as to whether they should tell the priestess that having identical triplets in the room was likely to cause as much commotion as anything. But they decided against actually saying anything, in the hopes that nobody would notice that they were literally the same person. They even smelled the same. That was something that humans wouldn't notice, but as Lycans they were very sensitive to it. And there was no variation at all. They weren't sisters or twins. They were the same person summoned multiple times by the spell. It was actually a bit strange, as even golems usually smelled slightly different. They didn't have a personal smell, but they were created at different spots, so they smelled a bit different based on what was used to make them. All right, we will be in your care. Keeping up with a shop that never closes and apparently never runs out of customers is an arduous task. Carl laughed at the Lycan's masked relief. The flow will slow soon. We just need to stay up here and keep making the basic items to keep the shelves filled so we can maximize the amount of money that we make before the big event starts. You know how it is in business. There are a few specific weeks of every year that generate the majority of your income, and the rest of the time, you coast. That's the spot we're at right now, it seems. We just happened to open right before the busiest shopping day of the year. Elder Blackwood chuckled. The luck of the world dragon in action. No plans, no awareness that it was even happening. And still, you managed to open just in time for every small sect to be sending their elders to the clan. And wouldn't you know it? There's a permanent portal between the two locations. Carl laughed. See, that's how things usually go for me. I do things, and it just works out. Honestly, I can't complain too much. However, standing too close to me is known to be stressful for others. The Lycans laughed and gave him pointed looks. They hadn't even been standing near him, they had just been associated with him, and his particular brand of chaos had caused them to have to pull an all-nighter in making gear using a skill that they had only just finished learning. If they had a bit more experience, this would be much less stressful. However, they had never gotten a chance to test out the new knowledge that they gained. They were just making the things that they knew worked because people kept buying them as gifts for the recruits they intended to find. The chefs had it easy in their minds. They got to just cook something and call it dinner. That wasn't quite true, though. No matter how good that you promised the food was, the children only accepted a handful of different foods. So, many of them found that while they now had amazing cooking skills, they were still cooking fried chicken strips and fried potatoes. A better version than they used to be able to make. But still the same simple dish that every pup liked. The bunnies who had received the cooking skill in the tiny world were the ones that had it easy. The dragon whelps were not particular about the food, as long as it was good. They were happy to try new things, and they'd even eat vegetables as long as the bunnies promised to have either meat or fish as well. After all, they were dragons, not Sero. Everyone had to make concessions, though. Even Button, their self-appointed resident advisor on all things Tiny World, had learned to like more things than meat and fish. She was a forest dragon, and they thought that might be part of it. But she knew what all the good things were, and that could only come from trying all the things until you knew which ones were no good. Chapter 1797. Guild Visitors. Despite his assertion that they needed all the crafters that they could get working on the second floor to make the items that were being sold, Carl found himself being called out quite frequently to meet with elders about the inventory. Everyone seemed to realize that the clerics were constructs, other than the moron, and they would frequently ask for the actual shopkeeper when they wanted to place a custom order. As Carl didn't know any of these people, and he wanted to make a good impression, he went out to meet them and got the description for an item that he could have had half made by then if they would have simply told the cleric what they wanted. Welcome to the Darklight Host Guild store, Blackwood's branch. What can we help you find today? Carl greeted a group who had just walked in, and then noticed that they had very familiar tags on their names. Ooh, a branch with a Void Tier branch leader. That is exciting. Does that mean this world is new? Like, first Darklight Host branch on the world? This is a big day. The Lycan girl seemed to be talking to Carl, but she wasn't giving him time to respond before she asked something else. Visiting guild members. You must have seen the guild store open in the guild announcements. The Lycan girl laughed. Actually, one of your branch's Lycan elders contacted our branch treasurer to let him know that they had opened a shop. He totally forgot to mention that they had joined the host. Carl laughed. Well, I'm glad that they're bringing us customers, even from other worlds. There is also a guild-run clothing shop not far away, just off the main street. What one is that? The Darklight Silks Emporium. They also sell leather armor and goods, but they specialize in clothing, especially silk clothing. It's run by a blood destruction demonic spider. The Lycan looked impressed. And she doesn't eat the customers? You really do live up to the reputation of an avatar. Carl laughed. She just advanced using a swimming pool full of blood after a victorious clan challenge. I don't think that anyone is going to start trouble in her shop for some time. The Leakin girl laughed. You're crazy. You think that he's crazy. You should meet the Badger, Elder Blackwoods informed her. Oh, Elder. We got your message. The old man said that there was good stuff in this city, so he sent you here for an hour. 1 hour? Then you're pushing your time. If you want to go shopping for clothes, you should finish up here quickly. If you're only gear shopping, you've got time. What did you need? The other immortals who had come with the Leakin girl laughed at the way that she looked between the door and the shelves. Go get yourself something to wear. We will pay with clan transfer if we find anything that you need here. I'm not sure how much they'll have that you actually need at this point, but if they've got a good blacksmith or artificer, they might have something. Carl laughed. Technically, we have neither. Though, we do have a full team of runecrafters, which can cover for most things. The weapons, we are having made in Immortal World with higher grade materials, then upgrading them with runes to make immortal weapons. Oh, that's not a bad option. Alright, what do you have for Blood Knights? Carl thought about it. I've got some rings that have bonuses to base life steal and added skill damage. I actually made them for rogues, but I suppose they're good for Blood Knights as well. The immortals smiled at each other. See, I knew that it would be best to come to a guild run shop for fun stuff. Our branch specializes in architecture and interior design. Carl chuckled. In a way, ours does as well. But using illusions and reality warp to create expanded separate spaces. That definitely doesn't count. I mean, we do it too, but that doesn't count as actually doing architecture. If you design the building right, you can do so much more with illusions and pocket dimensions. The resonance, you see? Carl shrugged. Not my department, so I will take your word on it. He brought out the items that would suit rogues and blood knights, along with some of the more esoteric items for warriors. Then, Carl brought out a few more of the peerless grade warrior items that he had been saving for later. The other immortals in the shop gasped, then glared at him. They had all thought that the peerless grade items were sold out. But the guild leader was simply rationing them so that they didn't all sell on the same day, and he could use them to lure in customers later. Wait, is this an in-house only thing for other branches of your guild? I want that bracelet, a warrior in deep blue robe shouted. No need to yell. All items are first come, first served. If you want it, we can discuss the price. The other guild members tried not to laugh. They could clearly see that the item was made by Carl. If they wanted one like it, they could just ask and have him send it to their branch. Once you knew the name of another Immortal Realm Guild branch, you could access them to send purchases to branch members. How that actually worked was a bit of a mystery, as many of the planets were fully isolated from each other. But as far as the members knew, it still worked. The warriors set crate after crate of raw immortal rank metal ore on the floor. Then he nodded in satisfaction. That should do it if you're willing to take raw ore. Carl let the store examine it, then nodded. I am. We can always use more raw materials. Here you go, your purchase, sir. Chapter 1798. Borrowed Time. Carl sighed as he saw the expectant looks on the other immortals' faces and brought out a few more peerless grade items that weren't geared toward warriors. Fine, but only because I'm weak to puppy eyes. The immortals laughed at his reluctance. They knew that he was only putting on an act, as he was going to make an obscene amount of money from these items. Even if he was reluctant to sell them all today, he was still going to making money on them. At this point, they all knew that if you waited too long, someone would scoop up what you wanted. So, the only viable strategy was to either find a buyer and get the money ASAP, or to beg and borrow every cent you could, buy the item, then pay your clan back. And this was going to be a big debt, unless they could find something to trade. Oh, that mage collar? Maybe not. I'm not wearing that in combat. Elder Blackwoods laughed as he saw what the mage was talking about. It was a black leather choker made by Ray that had 50% added spell damage and a load of mana regeneration on it, plus casting speed and a bonus to the last spell cast if you use the same spell repeatedly. It was truly worthy of being a peerless grade item. But it was also a thick black choker with a silver spiderweb pattern around the outside and a large ring at the front to attach a leash, or a name tag. One of the other mages looked at it, then shrugged. I think it's cute. I wonder if the shop sells a dress that goes with it. Her friend laughed. Oh, they do. They definitely do. Didn't you hear him say it's run by a spider priestess? A spider. She's an assassin type, not a priestess. Oh. Then, not only will she have the dress, she will have it in exactly your size, even before the system fits it to you. The Darklight host mage frowned, and Carl saw a tear roll down her cheek as a notice appeared in his interface. Interbranch transfer 1,000 clan credits transferred for the purchase of item, regenerative choker of recursive casting. Carl patted her on the shoulder and handed over the item. You have my sympathy on your savings account. It's worse. I borrowed a lot of that money from my mom. The mage's friends laughed. Oh, you're in for it now. She will put you to work if you can't repay that by the end of the month. That woman is a slave driver. Now, I need to go get myself a new dress before I lose my nerve and start thinking about how much I'll need for the payments on the debt. See you all soon, she announced, then ran out toward Ray's shop, tracking her friend's location. The first Leakin girl was already half buried in clothing as the golems modeled dresses and armor combinations for her. They had a very limited amount of time before their own branch called them home. They had indulged the group by letting them go check out the new store, but they wouldn't leave them unattended forever. Especially on a world where the Darklight host didn't have a strong presence. The others were busy picking through the epic grade items, things that they could actually afford without borrowing from friends and family. Well, family, as their whole friend group was here and about to be broke. All right, we will take these. Will the guild shop be open regular hours in the future? We might have some craftsmen willing to come trade furniture and other crafted goods for gear. Carl nodded. It will be staffed by the priestesses when none of the guild members are available. But we should have staff here almost all the time. We use the other floors for crafting and sleeping, so there are always at least a few people awake in the building, even if they're not normally store staff. Oh, that is perfect. All right, we should go find our friends and get back home. Good luck, branch leader. The immortals rushed out of the room, and the other guests smiled at their enthusiasm. You know, that woman is at least as old as I am, going by her aura. But she still hasn't lost that youthful vigor. Perhaps I have been looking at things the wrong way. Gaining a bit of power shouldn't require gaining the dignity that an elder is supposed to show. Carl laughed at the warrior. She's a forest dragon. Oh, good point. Yeah, there is no changing that. They're permanently optimistic. If you see a forest dragon looking sullen, you should probably buy extra life insurance. One of the other customers frowned. How do you even know that she's a forest dragon? That's not in the display, and you clearly just met her. Carl tapped the side of his head. I can see the difference. It's a passive skill. Soul Sight made it fairly easy to tell species apart, but he could also smell the distinctive notes that were forest dragon. If he needed, Carl could get additional information about guild members when he inspected them. Not that he bothered with the customers. Knowing all about them wasn't a priority, and half the time the information that it gave you was just more confusing than the question you were trying to answer. For example, the system listed both his name and his species as Carl. So, there were issues with looking up people who had particularly unique advancement progress. Most of the others appeared normal, thought the amount of information that the system shared tended to vary without any real guidelines. Perhaps it was personal preference? Automatically hiding what people didn't want to share? I can see their measurements, Ray informed him helpfully. Oh, perhaps it was skill-based? Ray was more attuned to the physical dimensions of people, so she could make them clothing. So, she could accurately determine the size of people. And that was a fact that Dana was not happy about. Chapter 1799. Overnight Shifts. Having Ray know every time that your measurements changed by a centimeter was annoying, but not the end of the world for Dana. She was plenty active and rarely changed weight. Still, it was a sensitive topic, and she knew that the spider compared everyone that she met in a dozen different ways. From how they would look in different outfits to what sort of flavor their blood might have. The shops were beginning to slow for the evening, But Carl did notice that everything was staying open, as they had enough customers to justify being open all night. The guests who had come to the new home for the recruitment event had heard of the outpost here, and many decided to come see what was going on, or to find a room here instead of camping out in the new home's outskirts. The town wasn't really set up for guests yet, but there were some empty houses. Unfortunately, there was nobody present who could tell them which ones those were, so they would still end up camping on the edge of town if they stayed here. However, the two towns were actually hundreds of kilometers apart, more than enough to put them out of the way of potential rivals, while the portal allowed them to easily return to the new home Merchant Clan's home city, where the recruitment event would be taking place. It was a bit of a loss not being in the area to scout, but avoiding the crowding was an advantage that was difficult to quantify. Carl gave up on trying to get back up into the second-floor workshop and decided to simply work in the front room, where intrigued customers could watch him making simple rare grade rings for the many warriors that the clans were expecting to take in. It was a convenient option, as any combat class could use the rings, even if it wasn't quite perfect for them. Even tank-type druids could use the warrior rings, so they made a great recruitment option. You know, I never get tired of watching you do that. But I should go set up camp somewhere on the edge of town. One of the men sighed. I'm sorry that we don't have more set up for guests. We're just getting set up, and our guild is still in the process of moving into their new homes, so we haven't even started setting up guest hostels, lodging, or hotels of any sort. Carl apologized. No worries. Half the clans are too paranoid to do it or to stay in one if it was offered. For an event like this, everyone is worried about being spied on. Getting a bit of advance information on prospects is vital to the process, and stealing a top recruit from one of your rivals is a huge victory. That's most of what you're making here, by the way. The bribes that will let people steal recruits from each other. Carl laughed. Well, if they all buy their bribes from us, then it's a win, no matter who finally ends up with the recruit, isn't it? The immortals watching him work all laughed. At the rate that he was going, the Darklight host was going to be the biggest winners of this year's recruitment event, and they weren't even intending to attend. If they did, and they managed to steal a few talented craftsmen, as well as all that they were making from their shop, they would likely outshine the new home Merchant Clan who was hosting the event. The two were clearly affiliated, as Carl was listed as a member of both factions, but the Darklight host was the crafting branch. The sun came up, and many of the crafters retired for a few hours before the morning rush, slowing the process of making the custom items. The demand level had also dropped, as people didn't want to wander a strange town in the middle of the night, so it worked out well. Carl didn't have high hopes for what was going to happen once everyone had finished breakfast and was ready to start putting their all into getting new members. Either they were going to get a flood of customers that were desperate to get their hands on the good stuff immediately so that they could close a deal, or the entire compound was going to be empty and everyone was going to crash out hard, sleeping the entire day away in the spare rooms closest to the workshop. That second one was bound to happen eventually, but usually immortals could push themselves for days or weeks at a time without sleep. The room slowly emptied as the sun came up, and Carl could hear the business at the bakery, coffee shop, and diner all picking up. Mostly with immortals who had been hanging around the guild house all night, but also with fresh visitors from the clan compound and the Leakin pack themselves, who were in need of something quick before they went to work. The cooks had something made in the guild house kitchen. Carl could smell it. But those who weren't staying here and weren't working here were avoiding the place this morning, so they didn't get mistaken for one of the craftsmen and badgered to make items they had no ability to help with. And even staying away didn't always help. Not when there were immortals who couldn't tell Lycans apart. To some of them, a petite Leakin girl with black fur was the same one they had seen earlier in the shop, and they were unwilling to accept that this one was a pastry chef, not the same person they had seen 6 hours earlier. You know, half the reputation of the Lycans as being stubborn is likely due to that. Opal joked as she listened to the barista explaining to the third person this morning that they had not just seen her across town. Elder Blackwoods laughed. They're not even wearing the same outfit. I don't know how much more we can do. I would say to put name tags on them, but those are already available and nobody reads them. We could open a salon? Perhaps some fur dye. Opal offered. The ancient Leakin shuddered in horror. No, I don't think that would be the best option. I suspect that some of the young ones might disagree with me, though. But the thought of dyeing my fur is just wrong. Chapter 1800. bunnies need orders. While Carl was busy in the shop, the tiny world was going crazy with productivity. The bunnies were ramping up their need to be helpful, now that they were settled into their new homes, and the dragon priestesses at the orphanage had proven incredibly competent, leaving nothing that actually needed to be done. So, the bunnies were only doing things for each other at first, but they were all too eager to please, and they ran out of things to do much too fast. So, they had started just following people around, looking for things to do, until Tessa had realized the issue. That was, "All right, everyone gather around. I have made up a work rotation," she declared. That brought bunnies running from every direction. Finally, someone had concrete directions for them. They had been given spectacular new classes and skills, but they had been left unattended to figure them out, and that was not a bunny's strong point. Those of you with trade skills, you will join teams working on your trade skill from 8 until noon. Then you have 2 hours for lunch and to clean your personal dens. Following that, you will report back to the training grounds to work on your class skills. For some of you, that means going back to your trade skill areas, and that is fine. The chefs have multiple meals a day to prepare anyhow, and the gardener class bunnies can move to another field. For those of you without trade skills, I have come up with a work roster based on what we're short of. Most of you will be with the dragons, working in the fields of alchemical resources. They require greater attention than the food crops, and the pros can tell you what to do. I will post it on the bulletin board today and update it as needed, so check it every morning. There were audible sighs of relief as someone took charge of their lives again. Tessa knew that the bunnies were intelligent and motivated sorts, but they had generations of strict obedience bred into them. The ones who misbehaved had long since been culled by their masters. So, what was left was a docile population who were used to simply doing what they were told. It had gotten to the point that they actually began to stress out if you didn't give them orders. So, she would send the combat-capable bunnies through the training tower once a day, giving them purpose aligned with their class, then send them out to do random tasks so that they didn't feel like they were slacking. When the bunnies were stressed, the whole tiny world felt unbalanced, as if permitting a bunny to suffer was against the rules of the world, even if it was something as mundane as letting them get bored. While Tessa knew that chaos reigned in Carl's team, with Thor being the only order-aligned teammate, she was a naturally ordered person who followed the god of war. War had rules. War was controlled chaos. Not quite order-aligned, but structured in a way that was certainly not chaotic. Strangely, setting the bunnies on their morning tasks was actually helping Tessa understand something about the nature of the fundamental rules. In a way, the bunnies were like the logistics staff of an army. They did their jobs behind the scenes and kept everything running. It wasn't glamorous work, and generally far less dangerous than the warriors on the front lines. There would be no glorious charges nor epic duels between the logistics staff and enemy champions. But they were the backbone of the war effort. The way that most teachers put it was that an army runs on its stomach, with an emphasis on having nature magic to make food. If you had food and healers, you could keep an army going, the logic went. And, to an extent, that was true. But it wasn't everything. It bypassed the human factor, the manpower that went into the invisible tasks that prepared even the healers to go to war. The craftsmen, the acolytes, the supply staff, the chefs. When you went to war, the ones fighting weren't only the soldiers, it was the whole nation, to some extent. Not in a proverbial way, but because their efforts were all vital to some aspect of a full-scale war effort. As she marshaled the bunnies to battle against the great enemy of boredom, Tessa smiled at the memory of doing exactly this on a smaller scale when Lotus got bored during their time at the Seminary Academy. The long-eared assistants were all sent off to their daily tasks, and Tessa was about to go check on her eggs when she felt something shift inside her. At first, she thought that it might be an injury of some sort, and then a brief but horrifying thought that she might be pregnant again. But then the imbalance began to shift to a growing sense of power, and Tessa realized that her last revelation was enough to trigger tribulation. She had gained enough understanding of the fundamental rule of war to fill in the last gaps that training and experience hadn't covered, and now she was going to advance. Whether she was ready or not. Thor was the first in the tiny world to sense the tribulation lightning, and followed it to where Tessa was standing in the middle of the plains. That was their designated spot for tribulations. It was out of the way, didn't raise huge winds that damaged crops, and didn't get lightning in the lake that killed the fish. That mistake had been made once, and it had taken far too much effort to save the aquatic population. So, no matter what your element was, you either went to the back mountain or the plains. You could fly over them if that made you happy, or dig a hole and sit in it. Even fill a pool with water, but no tribulation at the lake. For Tessa, that didn't matter. She wasn't aligned to a physical element. Red dragons breathed fire, but that was simply a matter of effectiveness in battle. Few things survived being melted with dragon fire. Sensing impending fun, Kara appeared beside Thor with a bag of popcorn and a pitcher of juice whose color should not exist in this plane of existence. All right, let's get this show on the road. Everyone else is on the way here now.